Here we go. Okay, so let me just do this. Hello, everybody. My name's Peter. I am here with Dominic Walliman and Emily. Emily, I forgot to ask you how to say your last name. It's Calandrelli?
Calandrelli, yeah,
Awesome.
it's a mouthful.
Yep, but it's a great mouthful. And these two wonderful human beings are here because they are authors of children's books, children's book series. And also, I like to think of them as my friends. So take that what you will. But I'm super glad that you could both be here. If one of you wants to introduce yourself, go ahead. Since Emily's on the screen, you want to go first?
Sure thing. My name is Emily Calandrelli. On the interwebs, I'm known as the Space Gal, hence the NASA shirt. That's because I have an educational background in aerospace engineering. So I went to MIT, studied aeronautics and astronautics engineering, and then today I'm a science TV show host and a children's book author. My book series is called The Ada Lace Adventures, and there are 5 books in the series right now. And when I'm not doing that, I am the host of a show on Fox called Exploration Outer Space.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, we have 5 seasons right now. We are working currently on the sixth season right now, but obviously not currently because we do travel to do that. So not doing a whole lot of that at the moment. And then I have a new show on Netflix that comes out TBD at the moment, but I'm really excited for that one. That will be announced fairly soon, I think.
That's awesome. I had no idea about all of these things. So, like, congratulations, first of all.
Thank you.
I'm a bit of a schmuck because I don't have television, so I don't watch too much Fox. But now that I know to look out for it, I shall find it.
Also on Amazon Prime. So,
Oh, okay, cool. Well, that solves that.
those of us who don't want to wake up early on Saturday mornings.
Relatable, relatable. Well, thank you so much. Now let's talk to our buddy Dominic. Dom, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, my name's Dominic Walliman. My background is in quantum physics. I've got a PhD in experimental quantum device physics. And nowadays, I write kids' books, a series called Professor Astro Cat. There are, how many books now? There's 4 main books and about 6 other books, I think. You lose track. And I also have a YouTube channel called Domain of Science, which is the main thing I do now. And I used to work on quantum computing for a while.
Cool. Yeah. So that's a little bit of background for everybody. We 3 fortunate few actually all met 2 years ago in 2018 at this great thing called ThinkerCon. And it was a blast. Emily gave me one of her books, which I quickly mailed off to my niece for a Christmas present. And then when we were there, Dom and I found out that we both lived in Vancouver, along with Curtis Bowdy, who's a treasure. And we've all been kind of keeping tabs on each other. So I figured, what with all of this going on, what better way to get folks together and talk about stuff that matters than the only way that we can. So, yeah, thank you both for introducing yourselves and for being here. Let's get kind of started. So, you both have, like you mentioned, you both have written a few books now in the same series. And I'm wondering what made you decide, or what made you think that you should start doing that? Like, what was the big impetus behind using books as a way for science communication, as it were?
Shall I go first?
Sure.
Sure. So I was brought onto the project by the illustrator. So it was the illustrator's idea, first and foremost, to do a space book. And then he was looking for people to write it. So I write the books. The illustrator is called Ben Newman, and he's actually a school friend of mine. So we go back a long way. I was a big fan of his art. You can actually see some in the background. Here are a couple of things that he drew,
Nice.
going back a long way. So we go back a long way. He was looking for someone who knew all about space. I used to obsessively tell him about all the crazy things about space that I was learning. And so I guess I sprung to mind when he was looking for someone. And I jumped at the chance because I was doing some science outreach at the time. Mm-hmm. And when you're given an opportunity to write a kid's book, I mean, you jump at it. So we started that back in 2011. Mm-hmm. And then we did the first book, which was on space. And we wanted to... at the time in 2011, some of the kids' nonfiction wasn't hugely inspiring. Mm-hmm. Ben worked in a bookshop, and a lot of the books were like composite, computer-generated images of, you know, planets and stars with big chunks of text next to them. And he always found it a struggle to actually recommend kids' nonfiction books. And so that was a big impetus for us to make it very illustrated, because I had loads of kids. Like when I was a kid, I would have like books on dinosaurs and nature and space that were all lavishly illustrated rather than the computer graphics. So we wanted it to be illustrated. We wanted characters in it because it's, I think, good to relate to characters. And humor and just funny stuff, and just to make it really fun. And the idea also was to try and have kids have a real positive experience on their own terms of engaging with science before some of the drudgery of learning science in school kicked in, where people get turned off by exams and tests. And so many adults now I talk to who didn't do well at science or maths in school have assigned themselves a label of being, I'm not good at science. Mm-hmm. It's so unfortunate that that's the lasting impression that people get from their school experience, is that, oh no, there's this thing, it's called science, and tick, it's not for me. Mm-hmm. And then that stays with them for the rest of their lives. Yeah. And that's unfortunate. That's not what education is supposed to be. Education is supposed to show you the benefits or the wonderful things that you can learn in every subject, not just science, but in arts and humanities and everything. So yeah, so that was kind of the mission statement to begin with, is to make it really positive and fun, and allow kids to sort of engage with these interesting subjects kind of on their own terms.
Cool. And when about did you get started with that? Like when was...
So 2011 we started planning it, and the first book was published in 2013.
Cool. Excellent. Cool. I love it. Great. So, Emily, how about you? What got you started?
Yeah, so I was, I think, a couple years into being like a TV host of a space show. And I would meet some of the families that would watch the show. And I noticed that there were actually, even though we were designing a show that was meant for middle school, high school and up, we had a lot of younger kids watching the show. And just because I had met all of these kids, I was sort of like, well, I'd like to do something separate that's like targeted specifically toward them. Mm-hmm. And thinking back to my childhood, I like was obsessed with reading. And I don't remember a ton of books about adventure or science that featured girls as the main character. There were a lot of like really great female characters in some of the books about adventure that were wonderful, but they were never like the main character. Yeah. And so I wanted to create a book that was about science and adventure that had a female as the main character. Also, this girl is from West Virginia. So I'm from West Virginia, moved to San Francisco. The girl in the book, Ada, she's a West Virginia girl who moved to San Francisco. And that was intentional, just her being from West Virginia, because West Virginia has a ton of stereotypes, and there's not a lot of really positive stories that you often hear about when it comes to West Virginia. So I just wanted to put like a really positive story about somebody who came from West Virginia who is very smart and adventurous, and just kind of breaking down a lot of stereotypes. So that was the inspiration behind creating the book. I guess I should mention the book is about a third grader who loves science and technology. And then she goes on adventures to solve mysteries with usually tech and gadgets and robots that she builds herself. And so mostly I would say like Ada is somebody who I wished that I was when I was a kid. I have always, like throughout my education, been very self-conscious about like my own abilities. I like going back to your point that you made about like, you know, you see science and you do it, you get something wrong, and then something clicks in your brain and you're like, oh, science isn't for me. I sort of had the assumption that like that was a genetic trait that you were born with. And if you didn't have parents or family that came from like the sciences or technology or anything like that, then, well, you didn't inherit that science gene, and that's not going to be for you. And so if I would try something and it got hard, I would just tell myself, oh, that's because I'm not good at this, and then stop. But in the books, I intentionally have her fail frequently so that she can kind of push back and look out for help and seek out help from friends and continue to like work through these problems until she finds an answer, because that's what I wish that I did when I was a kid. And it's something that like I continually have to work on myself to like fight that thing in my brain that's saying like, oh, it's because you're not good at this. Ask someone else to do it. Like, no, you learn as you fail and get smarter as you go. And so that's kind of the inspiration behind like how I tell her story throughout the book.
Cool. Yeah, I actually, when we were at ThinkYouCon and you gave me one of the copies, I remember flipping through it, and this is 2 years ago, so my memory might not be perfect, but I remember one of the first things I read like in the story was like Ada was in trouble and she had to go see like the teacher because she was dissecting things, and I thought, this is awesome. But it's such a like, based on how the rest of the story goes, it might feel counterintuitive initially to start with like, oh, the kid's in trouble, but like nevertheless she persists and goes on and does all of these really cool things, and it turns out that like, you know, she's not in the wrong. Like there's other ways to express her curiosity and ways to engage with that healthy and ways that don't get her in trouble. So yeah, that's really cool. And while we're talking about characters, I love that you mentioned that like Ada is a little bit of like, there's overlap between her and you, and she is in ways it sounds like the child or the childhood that maybe you would have liked or thought would have been really nice to have. Clearly things have worked out for you quite well already. So I wanted to turn it to Dom. Do you ever wish that you were a space cat?
Hey, you know, weirdly the thought has never crossed my mind, but that sounds pretty awesome. I'd be a space cat, yeah.
Okay. So the idea though of Professor Astro Cat, you said the book idea came from your friend.
Yeah.
But then when it comes to actually writing, like how much do you write from the perspective, I guess, of Professor Astro Cat, and how much thinking goes into like, how would an anthropomorphized science cat doctor do this?
Yeah, so Professor Astrocat is definitely the voice that I'm putting on when I'm writing. But the writing, because our books are very exhaustive, so they're almost like encyclopedias without looking like encyclopedias. So we cover as much as we can in each topic. So we've actually gone from doing space to doing other subjects too. So first book was on space, second one was on all of physics, third one was on the human body, and the fourth one's Deep Sea Voyage, which is all about the oceans. And in those books, the aim is to cover everything. And so when I write, I do research and then I write them pretty much without the characters in mind too much, because I'm just trying to compile all of the information. The biggest job is to work out which subjects to choose and then how to compress that information down into the right word count, which is often more like a crossword puzzle than it is creative writing. Because it's like, what's the most efficient, understandable explanation of all of these different things? And then after that, that's when we come up with characters and situations, when we've broken down the different topics, and then we add more character into it. And it started off just Professor Astrocat and Astro Mouse was his sidekick buddy. And then as the series have gone on, we became more aware it's good to have other voices there too. And so now we've got 3 female characters, 3 male characters, 3 kids who are doing the learning. Professor Astrocat and Astro Mouse are the Astro Cat is sort of like the more theoretical, scientific, head in the clouds kind of guy.
Mm-hmm.
It's like Astro Mouse is always just getting into trouble, playing with stuff, is a lot more carefree. And then Felicity, she's an engineer, and she's always fixing everything. So when something breaks or something, she knows how to fix things. And a lot of the stories involve devices or machines to shrink down into the body, or ships to explore the ocean. And she's in charge of running all of those things. And then the kids are there to learn, to figure out, like, what is this? They're there to ask all the questions. What's this? What's that? What's that? Why does this do this? And so that kind of like launches into the explanations of why things do things the way they do.
Cool. Yeah. And I'm glad that I was able to have both of you on here, because like it's two very different styles that I think are both super useful in their own rights. So like as a librarian, I do a lot of reader advisory, and usually, like, I love it. My favorite thing is when like a kid themselves comes up to me and says, I want to learn about this thing. And to be able to, like, Emily, we actually have all of the Ada Lace books in its own section, like in a bin. And so like if a girl comes up to me and says, I want to learn about science, I can just be like, come with me, take this bin. And it's so empowering to know that like I can do that, because I'm a big believer in the importance of representation and like people seeing themselves in the media they consume. And then on the other hand, like having a nice big survey of a topic, whether it's the human body, or that's a wink because he told me the book's coming out soon. That's totally fine. Or physics or space or any of that. Being able to know that I can go into the stacks and grab a book that's not going to bore them to tears, because that does happen a lot. Like because there's a lack of really well illustrated and really like intentionally designed for kids books about these topics, we don't have a lot on that. So I'm glad that also exists. Sometimes a kid just likes to take a book about a broad topic and sit down with it and read it right then and there. So yes, thanks to both of you for making that available.
It's great to hear that feedback, actually, because I don't get a huge amount of opportunities to see, other than just stories from friends and family who have, with their kids, and people send me photos of their kids enjoying different things, dressing up as different characters. Those are all great, but then, it's really cool to hear that they're actually useful in libraries to point kids at, to hold their interest, which is cool.
Well, and one of the other really cool things about them is like they're built to last, and when you flip through it, you can tell that this is made with intention. And that's a great book to give to a parent when they're saying, hey, my kid is interested in this topic. What do you have? You can give them that, and since they're adults and they kind of look at kids' books with different criteria, they'll be like, oh, this is perfect. Look at how like well crafted this is and not hokey. So yeah, people love it. Let's see. Oh, and then for those of you watching at home, if you have any questions, feel free to hit us up in the chat. We don't have any questions yet, but we're here to answer them.
I have a question for Dom.
Ooh.
Your books are just so like well crafted that I'm curious how long it takes to write just one of them.
Okay, so this has changed a bit. So the first one probably took 2 years. No, did it? It was about 1.5 years, I think, from conception to actually to finishing it. And I remember looking at my drafts, and there were 13 drafts for some of the pages, which is a lot of editing. But since then, we've actually kind of figured out the workflow and figured out how things should actually go. To begin with, we had no idea how to actually do it, because it really is quite a strong collaboration between me and the illustrator. And so we want to have the text and the images complement each other and really fit together well. And so for that, it needs us to both be on the same page in terms of what I'm trying to say and then what he's illustrating. When you're just writing a script, there's obviously you can't draw pictures in there. So what I've done is I've actually drawn sketches for Ben to draw upon, and Ben's done actually rewriting of my text to make it more fun or more. He likes to think of himself as that 8-year-old who's seeing this for the first time, because he doesn't have a science background. So he's always asking me the questions. And you probably find this as well, that when you're explaining something technical, the hardest thing is to wind back and kind of get rid of all of your assumed knowledge, because you know it, you take so much stuff for granted. But someone coming to a subject for the first time, they obviously don't know things yet. And so the hard thing is to try and explain things in the terms that they'll understand. And so, yeah, he's really good at bringing me up and stuff like that. So now, the first draft I can write in a couple of months, and then it will be a process of editing over several more months. And probably the whole process is about a year to write one of the big books. Yeah. How about you?
Oh, it's a much quicker turnaround. So I have a co-writer on my books, Tamsin Weston, and she's the one who has the expertise in writing for this age group. So she works as a writer and an editor in this field. And so it's been really helpful to work with her, because I came into this not knowing what it meant to write a chapter book series, which has a very strict type of format, very strict type of dialogue and language and vocabulary that you need to use for this age group. And so my expertise with this is more so the I can suggest sort of a story and a plot, and then the technology that I want to fit in it. And so I do a lot of rewriting of the story to make it fit with the technology that I want to include. And that the process usually, depending on how much outreach I need to do in terms of fact checking what I think I know about a field, because a lot of this is outside of my area of study. And even if it is in my area of study, I still need to fact check myself with other people in the field. And that can take a little while, but usually it's a process maybe over the course of 3 or 4 months. So it's much faster. But yeah, it's more fun, I think, when I'm dabbling with something that I feel like I know a little bit, but I still need to reach out for others, because usually people are pretty open to helping you make sure that your children's book is accurate and just volunteering their free time to look over something. One in particular, this is the 3rd book in my series, the Take Me to Your Leader. This is all about Ada learning how to use ham radio.
Awesome.
And the ham radio community is just so incredible. They are all over the world, and they're just this very tight-knit group of very passionate individuals who love ham radio. And so I reached out to one of the national leagues here, and they helped me fact check all of my ham radio and radio frequency related stuff, and how different ham radios work in certain ways, and how you can break a ham radio and reasons why they wouldn't work. So they helped me identify ways that Ada could fail, and then identify the solutions to those failures, which was really fun.
That's cool.
Cool. Dom kind of mentioned that when he got started, it was kind of at the prompting of his illustrator. And I was wondering, how did that work out for you, Emily? Was it just I have an idea and I want to do it, and you just start pitching it, or?
I didn't really have an idea other than the fact that I wanted to write a science book with the female character. My manager really helped me, introduced me to different publishers, and then I worked with them to come up with story, and then they introduced me to Tamsin, my co-writer, and then we worked together to identify who the characters are going to be and what traits are they going to have. And that was probably the most fun part in the beginning of being how do I pick characters? What does that even mean to do? Like, your natural reaction is just to like think of different people in your own life and what character attributes they have. So that was really interesting. I'm like, who do I pick for this? But yeah, that was fun.
Cool. Yeah, and that was actually a thing that I had forgotten about for a second, that like you'd mentioned that you'd been doing media stuff before you decided to start writing the book. Yeah. So you already had an agent and stuff like that. Cool. So we do have some folks coming in. Hey, it's our friend Alex Danis. So Alex, for those of you who don't know, is in the chat. Alex is an excellent YouTuber who does science stuff, and she has been doing it for a while. So if you don't know her, go look her up. But she says, also a bit late, apologies if you've already answered this, but how do each of you balance teaching clear, correct science with writing characters who have their own voices and stories? Is it easy/hard? And Emily, you want to start?
Sure. How do we balance teaching clear, correct science while writing characters have their own voices and stories? Yeah. I guess like the challenge would be this is like a third grader I'm writing about. And so how much knowledge do I assume a smart third grader has? So that can be a bit difficult, and just being like, if I know this is like a smart third grader, but I want it to be realistic. Like, this isn't Jimmy Neutron.
Right.
She doesn't have a lab like that's futuristic. Every bit of science in my book is grounded in real science. Some of it is a little bit exaggerated, but not by much. So I really try hard to make sure that it's like a third grader that could exist in the real world. And I think that's probably the biggest challenge of being like, okay, I want her to use a ham radio. So how much can I assume that she knows about a ham radio? Oh, well, like, she could actually technically get her ham radio license at the age of like 8 or something. So this makes sense that she would have her ham radio license, but it probably doesn't make sense that she would know like the technicalities behind all of how it works. So let's introduce a neighbor who is older and is much more knowledgeable.
Cool.
And so I just sort of lend the expertise of the science to an older character who it would make sense for her to go to. And so I think that's where I solve that problem, is just like with older, smarter characters in the book.
Nice. How about you, Dom? How do you find Professor Astrocat's voice?
So Professor Astrocat's voice is just my voice. So I don't have to worry too much about how to put things in different, phrase things differently or a different point of view. He's very much kind of coming to it as like the expert who knows as much as an expert knows, although I'm always very happy to point out all of the limits of our knowledge, because that's something I want to dispel, the notion that scientists know everything, which is a thing that I think is an unfortunate thing in the popular media, that scientists are the experts, and so they're the kind of bringers of truth to the world, and if they don't know something, then they're not a good scientist. And I don't know where this idea came from, but I like to dispel that and point out the scientific process is a voyage of discovery, trying to battle down the edges of our ignorance. But we know there's huge amounts of stuff we don't know, and almost the more we know, the more we know we don't know. And then with the other characters, that's where we can be a bit more creative about giving them a certain voice. But we've got a lot of leeway to do that because my voice is Professor Astrocat's voice. Then it kind of plays off the other characters when they have misconceptions or they ask questions about things. Then it always is a dialogue between Professor Astrocat and the other characters. So
cool. Yeah. Awesome. Let's see. And then we have another question from someone named Erebos D. Are y'all's books available in other languages?
Unfortunately, mine are not. And that's not a decision that's made by me. That's like up to the publisher. And so I would absolutely love it if they were, but yeah, that's not up to me.
Yeah, I've been really fortunate. The publisher's done deals with many other publishers around the world, and they're available, I think, in over 26 languages at the moment. So
Wow.
yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah, which is really
Amazing.
awesome. So they've been very proactive about approaching. I think there's a few book fairs around the world, and so they pitch their books to other publishers, and then do either a rights deal or a translation deal. And so yeah, so it's cool. I've got some of the ones in Korean and Chinese,
Nice.
and it's so cool to look at them.
That
I don't understand any of it. Unfortunately, I wish I did, but they're very cool.
Were there any like analogies or images that had to be changed for different cultures?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I got a few bits of feedback where it was more on the technical side of things that the foreign language publishers would want to change something with the foreign language edition where they weren't happy with how I had explained something. So a concrete example is with quarks, which make up protons and neutrons, which are the subatomic particles in the nucleus of an atom. And I had explained it, and we had decided to draw them as separate entities. But in reality, you can never get them as separate entities. They're always tied into some compound particle. And so, yeah, so then I had to, it wasn't so much a cultural difference, more the people doing the translation were not happy with my explanation of things. And so I had to explain my approach, which was that, yeah, technically this isn't correct. But in terms of a visual description and as a first pass of learning, if you're meeting quarks for the first time, seeing them as these distinct objects is kind of the first impression. You can latch onto this concept, and then later on you can learn, oh, actually they don't quite behave like this. And then you can kind of learn the nuances after that. So that was the argument that I gave.
That seems like a fair argument. It's. I would also liken it to the fact that like we have a separate name for them in our language, and so that is, you know, we have a word for it. Therefore, it seems like it would make sense to also have a separate picture for it, even though we know that that's not the way that they behave.
Yeah, definitely. And this is a balance I find comes up a lot actually, which is you can't, if you're explaining the atom, you can't just launch into the full quantum mechanical description of the atom to a 7-year-old or a 4-year-old.
Yeah.
You need to find stepping stones. So you start with the picture that you think is appropriate, and then clear up the details. So you kind of, whenever you're explaining anything, necessarily you're being inaccurate or slightly wrong.
Yeah.
And I think the more people understand that that's okay, the better.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the really cool and important things about kids' books themselves is, like, not just children read kids' books. We have had patrons who come in who are like, I don't understand this, like, very complex thing. Like, and it's the same reason that one Reddit, the ELI5, Explain Like I'm 5, is so popular. People do that at the library too. And like to be able to take someone in and be like, well, here's a kid's book. And we like tag them, like if it's a really simple kid's book versus if it's like appropriate for older kids, but not 5 and under. And so like the importance of all of this to me is making sure that as authors of kids' books, you do end up becoming kind of that translator of knowledge, as it were, and you do end up becoming the person who pushes back against, or maybe not pushes back against like the scientific community, but reminds them that like, hey, you're right, but also that's not where we're starting. Like we have to understand that the rest of the population is here, even though we might want them to be here. And Emily, you actually, I was watching a TED Talk that you gave not so long ago about, I think it was out at West Virginia, talking about how, as somebody being from West Virginia, like there's a big ingrained appreciation, as it were, for the coal industry. And I remember like the first thing that you did was like, you don't think climate change is real? How dumb. And then just highlighted like, when has that ever worked for anyone?
Yeah.
Do you, well, I'm guessing you do. You get a fair amount of time like doing that kind of translation from one level to another?
Yeah, so that talk was all about like having empathy when it comes to teaching, because a lot of times the gaps in people's knowledge is not due to what we assume is just lack of education. There are so many factors that influence what people learn and what's ingrained in their brain. And once something is like takes root in somebody's brain as a piece of knowledge, it also becomes a belief. And beliefs are just very, very difficult to change, especially if you don't understand how they came to that belief. Mm-hmm. And so for many people around the country, their belief is that climate change is not happening, or that it is happening but not due to human activities and we can't change it. And so rather than going at that approach of being like, well, it's because you're dumb and clearly you hate the world and you hate everybody in it and that's why you believe this, like that's not going to change much by doing that. And so for me, I had a firsthand look of the people who do believe that. And I use the word believe intentionally because, like, for some people, science really is a belief, unfortunately. Like, that's not something that it should be a belief, but it is for many people. And so I grew up in an area where, you know, being a friend of coal was something to aspire to. All of the major leaders in our state were part of this organization called Friends of Coal. So, for example, like our head football coach was a friend of coal. And in an area like of the country where you're number one on the worst lists, like number one in childhood obesity, number one in like the rate of people who are in poverty, number one in opioid overdoses, number one in all of these things. When your football team is good, like you hail the head football coach because that is like the one shining light in your state. And when the head football coach is a friend of coal, then you are too. And if you're not, then why do you hate West Virginia? Mm-hmm. So it's like really ingrained in the society of like, this is a sense of pride. This is who I am. This is who we are collectively. And so anyways, part of that is that you see environmentally friendly measures as not being friendly to you. Mm-hmm. That is something that is very anti-you. Mm-hmm. And in order to support your state and in effect support who you are as a person, you say, I don't believe in that. Mm-hmm. And so unless we can address all the issues that lead to I don't believe in that, then you're not going to change anybody's minds. Yeah. And so coming at it from a different approach can be helpful. Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily a lost cause, but like it's going to take a lot of work to convince some of those people in the area that this is happening. But you can't go at it from the approach of like, save the polar bears, you terrible human. Yeah. Like that's not going to work. There are different ways that I think that it can work, but that's not.
Yeah, I agree 100% with what you were saying. Everything about approaching people with compassion, with different backgrounds, you know, and what you just said about their beliefs being based on a history of education or patterns of thought. That most people are completely not aware of the reasons that they believe. That rings so true, and you articulated it really well. I'm going to have to think about that more, actually, because that's really cool.
Excellent. So obviously, or maybe I'm wrong, maybe you were, but my understanding is that nobody was born an author. And so I was wondering if early on in the career or when you were first getting started, did anyone give you like a piece of advice that just resonated with you? And I know this question is coming out of left field, so I'll give you a second to think about it. And I will say, I'll give my own example. When I was first starting, and you can tune me out while you think. When I first started doing YouTube videos, it was while I was doing this interview series across North America and Europe. And I swung by Missoula, Montana, home of the Crash Course and SciShow team. And I was talking to Nick Jenkins, who's the producer or was the producer for either Crash Course or SciShow or both. And one of the pieces of advice he gave was kill your darlings. And that like the idea being like, if you find an idea that you love and it just isn't working out, just let it go. And I found that once I was willing to do that, like, I was still getting stuck on ideas, but I could make peace with them not working out and move on to something else that would work. So how about y'all? Any little gems?
I mean, I don't have something specific to children's book writing, but just
Anything.
writing in general.
Yeah.
So as you can imagine, so I come from West Virginia, don't know anybody in my family or extended family who pursued sciences. Most people in my family didn't go to college. Many didn't finish high school. And so for me to have gotten to MIT, like I had to apply to lots of different things to like make a name for myself as I moved on up there for grad school. And so I won a number of like national awards from like high school to then, to just be like, I am this, but I am also like on a national scale, I can compete at a national scale. And so anyways, that required me to get really good at perfecting essay applications. And so the thing that I learned the most is that once you write something and you think it is absolutely perfect, you are only viewing it from your personal lens, and you just can't get the perspective of somebody else who's going to be reading that and judging that. And so having multiple people read what you've written can be incredibly beneficial, because you're not seeing everything that you could be. You're not seeing like all the errors in your writing. You're not seeing how the story is told, because you have a lot of assumptions in your head that like, you know, that the character knows this, but you may have forgotten to write it down. And it may just like not come off as the way that you think. Even if you write something and then take a break and then 3 days later come back to it, you're going to see something new. I've started writing a picture book, and it's like about a baby. And I just had a baby like 8 months ago. And so I'm clearly thinking of my own child when I write this. And I'm writing it and I'm crying and I'm like, this is the most beautiful thing that's ever been written. Awards are going to come rolling in. And then I like take a break from it. A week later, I sit back down and look at it and I'm like, this isn't very good. I was clearly like very emotionally invested into what I was writing, thinking it was so good. So anyways, best piece of advice is like, take a break from your own writing, read it like when you're in a different mood, maybe even in a different location a week later, and then also have lots of other people read it, just because like you convince yourself sometimes that something is very good when it may not be.
Excellent. Thank you. Dom, how about you?
I'm racking my brains for advice that I've been given, and I realize I haven't really had any sort of like writing mentors, because my background, the only people I really know are physicists. So I don't know that many writers.
Well, let's turn this question around then.
Okay.
What kind of advice would you give to someone who's like really in it, like really deep into the science, who wants to communicate their ideas to folks who aren't?
My best piece of advice would literally be to like, and this is the same advice I give to people who want to become better presenters, is go and talk to grade school classrooms about whatever you're trying to write about. Because most teachers are very, very happy to have someone with a scientific expertise come to their classroom and talk about their expertise. And you can use that as a platform to like practice storytelling, because the best thing about little kids is that they will let you know when you're being boring, and they will let you know when you're not being funny. And so you can just like test out material on them over and over and over again until you get it right. And that's like something that I have loved doing, because it's like when they're into it, it's like the best energy that you could get. So yeah, that's my advice, to go talk to grade school classrooms.
Excellent.
Yeah, I would say a big barrier is to writing in general is to try and be too perfectionist to begin with. And so for the first draft, just absolutely splurge out whatever you want on a page. Be as what's the word? Uninhibited. There we go. As possible, because I think it's our own inhibitions that get in the way of us writing. And so, yeah, that's a thing I would recommend to people to do. And for scientists to communicate science to other people, there are a few points that I think are good to bear in mind when you're explaining things. The first one we've covered already, which is trying to explain things in terms of the vocabulary or the knowledge of the audience you're trying to explain things to. That's really important. Not trying to be too correct. It's okay to not explain things perfectly accurately to begin with, as long as you get the first point across where people can build upon that knowledge later. Another one is to not explain too much stuff. So don't go too far down the rabbit hole when you're explaining things. And then the other thing, which I think is really important, is when you're explaining a certain subject, people often forget to explain why this subject is so interesting or why they're so enthusiastic about it. And I think explaining why you should care about a certain subject goes a long way to people actually engaging with it. Once they see the relevance, or it doesn't even have to be directly relevant to them, when they can see that it's so cool, that is a big hook to then get people intrigued. And I think as part of the storytelling as well is that to begin with, you want to give people something, a nugget that's intriguing, or a puzzle that they need the answer to, or a question that is unresolved. And those starting points are really useful to then keep people hooked. So for kids, if you're like, what do you think will happen if I mix this with this? And they immediately they want to know what will happen when you mix things with this. Or what do you think's in this box? I think that's the key to all storytelling, is you just show people a box and point at it and say, what's in this box? I feel like that's all of storytelling.
That's the secret formula to making good YouTube thumbnails too. I'm just going to, from now on, every single one is just going to be a finger pointing at a box saying, what's in this box? And it's so true though, because like Dom, you kind of balance that tricky thing of you're not just a kids book author, you're not just a scientist, you're also a YouTuber. And so like and Emily, like, you're not just a kids books author, but like you do media that hundreds of thousands of millions of people see. And like to get stuff like that to work, there is that need to get people hooked somehow, because if you don't, it's not going to work out. And it's so bizarre to see that that's turned into like a science unto itself, where even on like a platform like YouTube, they just straight up say, if your thumbnail ain't great, no one's going to care. So yeah, good advice. Thank you. I'm going to check and see. It looks like we don't have any other questions, and we're around 1:47. So to be mindful of time, do you, and this is not meant to inspire guilt, but have either of you been reading anything interesting as of late?
Ooh, my friends have convinced me to do a book club with them, which I have been very bad at, but I did read the first chapter recently. The Sympathizer.
Okay.
It's a Pulitzer Prize winning book. It's a very long, I'm a very, very slow reader, so it's going to take me months to get through it. But that's been pretty good for the first 20 pages, but don't really know too much about it just yet.
Okay. How about you, Dom? Anything good lately or ever?
Yeah, I've read some short stories by Ted Chiang. He's kind of writes sci-fi short stories, but in a very non-traditional sci-fi way. In fact, a lot of it is sort of almost historical fiction, but with sci-fi elements in it. So it's a really interesting take on taking things like entanglement, and he'll write a short story about it, or the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. But he's kind of a genius. He finds such interesting ways. So yeah, Ted Chiang's short stories. He's got 2 anthologies,
cool,
which I recommend.
Is it called Exhalation? Which one are you reading?
Yeah, Exhalation, and the second one came out last year, I think. I'll have a quick look.
How long are the stories?
Oh, I guess they'd take about half an hour to read. Some are.
Oh, that's like my.
Yeah.
That's my niche.
Yeah. If you find yourself wanting to read more, so Neil Gaiman, famous author of anything worth reading, he has this great quote where he was talking about how, like, when he was young, he would read comic books, and like nowadays, he'll hear from a lot of parents who are like, hey, how do I get my kid to read? They only want to read these trashy, like, graphic novels or comic books. But, like, legit, graphic novels and comic books are a great place to start if you have a lot of trouble committing to a whole big story. Like, just so happens that right now during the pandemic, everybody's having difficulty reading. And so if you want to enjoy the pleasure of reading, but you don't want to commit to something long term, my advice to you as a librarian is start with a graphic novel. You can find them online, you can find ebooks of them, and they're really short. You can make it through one in like a week if you really take your time. And the stories are just as good. The writing's just as good. So maybe that's something for us all to consider. I think I'm just about out of words to say.
How about you? What have you been reading? Anything good recently?
Well, I've been trying. I'm working through Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Yeah, because I read it back for the first and last time in like 2003, 2004 when I was still in high school. And I thought, I want to read something that's lighthearted, that won't make me think about everything that's going on, that's just enough of absurdity that, like, I don't relate to it. I'm just strictly entertained by it. It's been working. It's been great. And then as a librarian, I don't actually read a lot. It's a professional misconception. We never have time.
Like, if you work in a chocolate factory, you'll never actually want to eat any chocolate.
Yeah, which is why I avoid working at chocolate factories for that very specific reason. And then the person who was here last week, Kira Jane Buxton, wrote an excellent book called Hollow Kingdom. So you should check that out. The ebook's available everywhere, and it's excellent. Also, last plug is if you like Harry Potter, the Harry Potter books are free, available through all libraries everywhere right now, as ebooks and audiobooks. So if you ever wanted to listen to Harry Potter in Spanish or Portuguese or whatever, or just English, as the case may be, now's your chance to do it for free. They're really great. So I've been listening to Harry Potter in Spanish lately.
That's cool.
Yeah. I've heard the audiobooks there, like for the Harry Potter series, are just amazing.
Yeah, they are great. Kira last week was talking about how there's like superstars in the world of audiobook recording, and she lucked out and she got one. So yeah, cool. Just the last scan of the
in the chat zone.
Althena
Luna has been saying Calvin and Hobbes is brilliant. Yeah. Calvin and Hobbes is absolutely brilliant. I think I've read all of them, and as a kid I used to read them a lot, and I think they're just genius books.
Yeah. When I was first learning Spanish, one of my Spanish teachers set me up with Mafalda in Spanish, and Mafalda is a great series out of Argentina, and it's very similar. Like, it's a little kid working their way through life in like 4 panels at a time. But it's great practice. So yeah. And then she also says Phoebe and her unicorn has glossaries in the back of most of them. So that's pretty great. Cool. Well, I think, we're good for time. Thank you both so much for being here. This has been great.
Thank you. It's been delightful.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course. And if people want to find each of you online, where's the best place to find you?
I'm Dominic Walliman on Twitter and Instagram, and then on YouTube I'm Domain of Science.
Cool.
And then also on Flickr I'm Domain of Science too. So I do a lot of videos which involve big posters of collecting all of the subdisciplines in physics together or mathematics together. And so I've got all of my images on Flickr for free, which you can go and have a look at or download, especially for educational purposes too. So,
how about you, Emily?
And then I'm the Space Gal everywhere. Thespacegal.com, Spacegal on The Spacegal on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And then I did recently sort of start dabbling in YouTube at youtube.com/Spacegal.
Nice.
Over the last month, I've come up with 21 different science experiments you can do at home with hopefully materials you already have lying around the house. So something fun to do while we're all staying at home. So yeah, 21 different videos on that recently uploaded.
Nice. Yeah, I saw the one with the balloon with water of the candle, and I'm just like,
Oh yeah.
oh, I know that it's gonna be fine, but like, it's so counterintuitive.
No, that one's terrifying. I hate balloons popping, so that was like, I woke up and I was like, I do not want to do this one.
All right, you two. Well, again, thank you so much. I'm just going to cue this up so that we have a clean exit. And to everybody watching at home, thank you so much for tuning in and bringing your questions and just caring about kids. And until next time, don't forget to ask questions. All right,